Thank you to 12th Street Sound for sponsoring today's episode. If you're an artist and you want your next recordings to stand up to the best of the best, you need to learn more about 12th Street Sound, a recording studio in my home city, New Westminster, BC. 12th Street provides the value and bang for your buck that you can only get from a boutique studio. That's why I keep choosing Anthony Senarini at 12th Street Sound as my recording and mix engineer for my own music, released as William Chernoff. Anthony and the team are collectors and restoration specialists obsessed with music and recording equipment. When I go into the studio, I get more than just great service. I get the space to craft my story as an artist. You deserve the same as you work on your new music for 2022. Whether you need pre-production, tracking, mixing, or full production services, check out 12th Street Sound today and tell Anthony about your next project. Learn more at 12thstreet.ca. That's 12thst.ca.
I didn't know about music marketing. You know, when I was taking my bass lessons growing up, it's not like here's a walking bass line and here's how to write a press release or something. It was not something I had learned before.
Hello and welcome, everybody. My name is Will Chernoff, and you're listening to the Rhythm Changes podcast, a home for creative, improvising, local music people. With Rhythm Changes, we're striving to make the best possible interview show about a music scene. So if you're joining us for the first time, whether from Vancouver, BC, elsewhere in Canada, or across the world, get involved today with a visit to our website, rhythmchanges.ca. Our two guests today are members of Sugarfungus, a 5-piece indie pop collective who released their first EP, Letting Go Moving Still, on January 26, 2022. You can follow them at Sugarfungus Band on Instagram, stream their music anywhere, or find them on Bandcamp. The 5 band members are Tess Meckling on vocals, Braden DeChico on guitar, Alex Marr on bass, Jackson Moore on keyboards, and Ivan Barbu on drums. And joining me today are the bassist and the vocalist. So please welcome to the Rhythm Changes podcast, Alex Marr and Tess Meckling.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Right on. Well, I'm a bass player, and one thing that grabs me right away about Sugarfungus is the bass sound, right from the first notes of track 1, Catch and Release, but especially for me on probably my favorite track 2, Retrospect. How did you, Alex, I'll start with you, settle into this sound for your bass playing?
I use a pick for about half of the album and fingerstyle for 2 or 3 of the songs. And I'm doing some slap as well, so it's pretty eclectic how I'm approaching it. Whatever kind of was fitting the style of the song or the genre that I was hearing. So I guess that's how I write. I have to hear something first. If that sound hits, that's what I kind of chase.
Yeah, it sounds like you're really open-minded about it. Like the slap bass fills were something that grabbed me for sure. And just how compressed that pick bass sound is and how powerful it ends up being and how prominent it is because it comes right from the first notes of the first track.
Yeah, but actually Tess wrote the bass part of that song, Retrospect. I loved it. I didn't really change much of it other than maybe I wanted it to have that certain timbre. But it was super groovy. She wrote it before she joined the band and then just presented the demo. And I fell in love with that track instantly. I was like, this is amazing. Thank you for bringing the song. I just loved the bass line on that. So it's cool. We have songwriters who are writing not necessarily their own instruments. I wrote some guitar parts. Tess wrote some bass parts. If we hear something, we try to communicate with each other to see if we can make it work and fit.
Tess, what do you think about how that song came together? And were there any other ones that were like that? Or are you bringing in a lot of these songs? Where are they coming from?
You know what? It's funny. Like that's the only song that was just a fully formed thing that I brought to these guys with like the bass line and all the parts. Like I wrote that stuff in Ableton. Like I'm not a bass player, I wouldn't call myself a guitar player. I was doing most of the stuff just based off what I was hearing, kind of like what Alex was saying. It's like if you hear it, you can get it down. And if you have a way of communicating it, then I think that's what matters. But that was cool to hear it come to life with these amazing guys. So
yeah. And staying with you on the general bird's eye view over the project, like you use a lot of different vocal registers, some high and some low. And it really does a great job of adding variety as you listen through the EP. So I'm curious, like, how intentional was that?
I think it's just representative of how I sing usually. I am really interested in all of the capabilities of the human voice, and some singers are really, really consistent throughout their entire range. And for me, I find that the tone changes quite drastically based on my range. So I do try to utilize that as much as I can. And that did become a trademark of this EP, I think, which is so cool to kind of have something concrete that is representative of you and has that little, artistic flair to it, I guess.
Yeah. And then going to Alex, more about the releasing of the songs on this EP. You put out 3 singles in advance of it: Ghosts, Retrospect, and Catch and Release. So how did you decide which of these singles and which order you would use for those single releases in the lead up?
Just based them on our demos before we released them or finished them, and which ones were getting us to kind of dance the most, I guess, or groove. So we really liked Ghosts and Retrospect, which were originally our 2 planned singles. And then we kind of had some advice from a consultant. They suggested that you can just continue releasing all your songs on your EP as singles. It's just about gaining traction or getting attention with each release and giving love to each song, because releasing singles seems to be the model these days.
Yeah, and I would say that's especially true in your kind of indie pop, dream pop, indie pop rock genre. You can definitely just go single after single and kind of build some steam as you went into something like this. It was a funny thing that I thought about Retrospect, though, because Retrospect, it floats with no drums for like a really long time at the beginning of the song. And then it has like this guitar solo at the end. And so there's a ton of stuff going on in this song, but yet it was also one that got you a pretty significant playlist placement. So I'm just wondering what either of you think about that. You can pick whoever wants to lead off on this, but what was that like when you got that placement on that editorial playlist?
It was honestly kind of a crazy feeling. I felt, just having written the tune, like I felt like it didn't really get the listeners that I had hoped it would get. And that was partially just due to my lack of experience in production and my sort of lack of outreach to other musicians as well. I was kind of just hunkering down and like making my little songs in my bedroom studio and not really doing anything about it. So I think like Sugarfungus gave it the platform and the audience that it kind of needed to get some listeners. So I'm so grateful for that. But definitely unexpected. Definitely really, really cool.
Yeah. And I think this is a good time. Alex, you can chime in with your thoughts, and then if you want, you can continue on. And I want to hear more about that consultant that you mentioned, because I think you told me that was from Music BC, and you learned a lot about how to steer the band's marketing from this call. And we're kind of talking about that. So first, whatever you were thinking on the editorial playlist side, your reaction to that, and then what happened on that call.
I was super happy. Like, I was just checking the Spotify for Artists app, and I saw that all of a sudden we had like 15 people listening to it, and we'd never had that before. It's like, it was usually just our friends or people in our community listening to our stuff. And then I was like, okay, hold on, something's going on. And then I checked, and we were on this editorial playlist, and I messaged the band. I was like, holy, like we're on this list. That's huge for us. Like, this is a really big break for us. And within a week we had like 10,000 streams on it or something, and that was pretty huge for us. And you're right, like it does have a slow build to it, and it is a 5-minute long song. So I think traditional radio or something, you need to have something within the first 30 seconds. You need to have the hook. So, and Retrospect kind of has the chorus, but it doesn't have the beat until like a minute in. So yeah, you're absolutely correct in the assumptions that it's not something that would traditionally be a single. I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's an example where the playlist kind of has an advantage over the traditional radio playlisting style, where you can pick a longer thing like that if you think that people are going to sink deeply into it and save it and appreciate it more.
Yeah, for sure. And then, so we joined Music BC last year. And if you're a musician in BC, I'd recommend it because they have some good services that they can provide for you. And one of them was called Jumpstart Consulting. So we met with an artist manager. I chatted with him for about an hour and I picked his brain on everything, like how should we release our music? Because I knew nothing before this. What are the best practices? What are the do's and don'ts? And he was very helpful and reassuring that you can release a single every 2 months, and there's value in things that like college radio, for example. I had no idea that industry people might like to see that you're doing that. Getting write-ups through services like Submit Hub. It opened my eyes to a lot of things that I didn't know about music marketing. When I was taking my bass lessons growing up, it's not like here's a walking bass line and here's how to write a press release or something. It was not something I had learned before.
Yeah. And then Tess, where are you at on some of this stuff? Is this something that you also get involved with often on the band side? Or do you see Alex more doing a lot of the legwork on this front? How does the division of labor sort of work it out in the band, and where do you fit in?
Alex does like 95% of the work, if not like more than that. Yeah. I think Alex is very just intuitive in that sense. I think all of us are introverted to some degree. / hey, I'm a little bit lazy. I'm a lazy musician. I'm not afraid to admit that. Yeah, I think it's, you got to like take the leap and kind of just believe in yourself enough to say, hey, like we're good and we need to make other people believe that, and that's like harder than it may seem. A lot of musicians feel like that they can do the art part of it, but it's, it's harder to promote yourself. So I think we're all learning, but Alex definitely takes the initiative on those fronts.
Nice. Well, good for him. I mean,
yeah.
Yeah. So Tess, sticking with you, we have a section of our audience that is musically literate for sure, making and releasing music as well. And one thing that definitely interests me, probably them too, and maybe also the non-musicians, is that flow from one of you to the others in a 5-piece band that has come up as online collaborators from your own homes. Can you talk about what happens when a new song goes from one member of the band to the next? What does that actually look like?
Yeah, as people may know or may not know, we formed during the pandemic. So all of our work was done in our own homes, and we had to communicate virtually and, bounce ideas off each other. Sometimes it starts with a lyric, mostly coming from Alex. That's where a lot of those first tunes came from. And then, I might hear a melody and we'll collaborate on that, or I would write a verse of a tune, and from there Braden might add like a guitar part, and that would be some insight into, oh, should we put a vocal part in here? Is it too busy? So I feel like several people might communicate more at one time, and then it's like, oh, okay, let's add the drums, or I have this cool bass line. Like it kind of depends on the song, I guess, but I think it's pretty seamless. It has been seamless so far in our songwriting process. So I think a lot of that comes down to like, we like a lot of the same music, and we have a vision for what we want our music to sound like. So it's been really easy so far to get that songwriting process happening, I would say.
We upload like the stems of each of our tracks in a Google Drive. So like everyone has kind of the session. And if there's ever an updated stem, someone just shoots a message like, hey, I made a new bass line or something, and you can update the song or the demo at least. We try to keep it open, like people can rearrange and remix the demos as much as they want when we're writing it. And then when we decide that the song's written, we start recording the final takes.
Yeah, that's fancy stuff. That's what a lot of tech and business people would call asynchronous work, man.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. I mean, I guess then the last question I would have on that is, well, what's a little bit more detail, maybe from either of you, depending on who sees this more often, because I know that a lot of the lyrics kind of get written in response to the musical soundscape and they draw the inspiration from the sounds, but like, What else can you say about like how you decide when it is finished, like at a given stage? Because that seems like maybe one of the hardest parts of this process.
Well, like for vocals, like Tess is definitely the final decision maker for lyrics and vocals and stuff. But then for the composition, Ivan did a lot of the final decision making. So we'd give him notes, and there might be some pieces that were in the original demo that he would just cut out for the sake of the composition or arrangement. And we'd get messages late at night from him, be like, "Hey, I need you to add this melody here, or this needs to be changed here," things like that. So having his expertise, because he has experience as like a film composer, was insanely valuable for us. So he was a decision maker for some of that.
Yeah, I would just add to that and say, like, you can't overstate Ivan's enough. Like, he just has an ear for, when the energy needs to stay high, or when we need a moment of like pause and quiet, or, this 16 bar phrase is dragging on too long, need to shorten it to 8 bars kind of thing. That's huge. Those little details he really nails.
I'll tag one thing on, and it might be a musical cliche, but the song is never really done, is it? It's just kind of an iteration. So at one point, you just kind of have to let go and just say, "This is it."
Gotcha. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I was always fascinated about that when I heard about the recency of how you started and how you met like every week virtually, or you met on the Sundays when you were collaborating. You talked about that in another podcast that you did while you were putting out the singles that I would recommend any of your other fans who haven't heard it yet to go check it out on the 1079 Evolution podcast network, affiliated with BCIT, I believe, hosted by Camille Paterno. I checked that out before talking to you guys here, and you talked about the band's origin story more there for sure. But one other thing I noticed was this artist playlist that you have on Spotify called Sugary Fun Tunes, where you have a curated collection of your top songs as a band from 2021 that you've listened to or that you identify with. And I definitely noticed that the Zolas were on there in terms of local bands. So from your perspectives, which local, especially, influences are the most relevant to you guys?
I mean, I think we all like Peach Pit, and they're pretty huge from Vancouver.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
But I mean, yeah, growing up in Vancouver, there was so many influences from the indie scene. How many bands like Mother Mothers of the Whale, the Zolas, like all that cohort of indie bands that came up when we were in high school, and they definitely shaped who we are as musicians. But then, yeah, going back to the Spotify playlist, like that's mostly Jackson and myself. Maybe before this band, I had started to do some DJing, and I did my first paid DJ gig New Year's Eve 2019, 2020, and I was all amped to do more DJing, and then obviously that didn't work. I think Jackson probably listens to the coolest music out of us. He could be a curator himself.
Nice. Tess, any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I agree for sure. It's cool to have these people who you might have known before they kind of got their break, and you might even know them personally, and you aspire to find your own break kind of thing. But I'm also inspired by bands who are like doing their thing and are sort of in your circle. So Dante's Paradise, Club Sofa are two really, really great bands who I take a lot of inspiration from personally, and they're within the CAP community as well. So yeah, lots of kind of levels of inspiration for sure.
That's cool. Yeah, I had Todd Stewart on the podcast recently. We were talking off air before the show about some of that stuff. He's in your cohort at CAP, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. It is a small community. My last little question on the music side could go to either one of you because it is kind of about drums. On Contagious Love, track 5, there's super live sounding, acoustic sounding drums. And that's a huge, huge change from the sound of the previous track, Ghosts. And it's also pretty different from the other tracks. So I was curious how you decided to do that, because I found it really refreshing when I arrived at that track,
Yeah, totally. I feel the same way. We definitely wanted to have some electronic elements in some of the tracks, but I just kept hearing like a break beat that would fit with that piano riff, and I was like, oh, this would be cool with like a breakbeat sample maybe. But Ivan's insane jazz drummer, and we got him to play something like that for that tune, and I think it sounds great.
Yeah, I thought it sounded great too. And it was another example of how you managed to really fit a lot of great variety into those 6 tracks. But that just speaks to the fact that you're a 5-piece and you get to bring in all these different perspectives, and it really adds up to something really cool. And I know that, as I just mentioned with like Todd Stewart and with Tess, from that Capilano University community, same as me. I know Alex didn't go to Cap. That's part of the band's origin story. It's to do with being in a science lab and naming the band Sugarfungus. But Tess, maybe more personally on you for a second, where does Sugarfungus fit into how you came up in music, learning jazz and studying voice and getting better as an all-around musician? And what does it mean to you to have this kind of outlet today? Where does Sugarfungus fit into your musical path as a singer yourself?
The jazz beliefs are going to come from me, but I did not grow up listening to jazz. To be honest, I grew up playing classical music, and my first experience with singing was just singing for fun, and hearing songs on the radio and trying to figure them out by ear on the piano. And like, that was so formative to me. And I mean, I love jazz, and I'm like so grateful for it. And it's such a rich and amazing tradition and deserves all the respect. And I've learned so much for sure. Sugarfungus is definitely aligned, I think, with me as an artist, and it's the most creative. I would never want to put myself in a box of like, I just do this one thing.
Yeah. My last question about where you're headed as a band then is that you recently applied to and received the Factor Artist Development Grant, and I've received that one twice myself as an artist. I enjoy hearing from friends and guests about it. In brief, what are you planning to do with this grant?
Well, I think we had planned to maybe fund some live shows, but as well as marketing. But I think we're spending it mostly on marketing now, given that we even had our very first gig has been postponed. We got that email today. So we're spending it mostly on promotional material. Like we're making a music video that's going to come out. We hired a company called Auteur Research, and they're doing a digital marketing campaign for us. So it's kind of nice because normally I probably be a little bit out of our budget to spend it on that, but it's if you get a Factor grant, you might as well try something like that and see if it pays dividends. But it's still just building an audience for us. That's what we're going to spend the money on. We're going to continue, I think, just recording music from our homes and saving pennies that way.
Sounds good. So my last question before we hit the road here, metaphorically speaking, is about the EP title, Letting Go, Moving Still. Who came up with that, and how did you come up with that?
I think I came up with it. I think listening back to the songs of the EP, there's this theme of reflection. To me personally, is letting go of things that were stopping me from writing songs before, letting go of internalized like gatekeeping of sticking to a genre, as kind of Tess maybe mentioned, or being in a band, or all these kind of things, as well as we were thinking a lot about things while we were in isolation, and quite literally moving still, like we were moving on, but we're stationary beings. So that's where it came from.
Yeah. Tess, any final thoughts?
No, I think, Alex said it. I think it has some really nice imagery to it. And yeah, we wanted something that wasn't so explicit and kind of cliche, and then also still had some meaning to us. So,
well, mission accomplished on that for sure. I would say the main thing that I've learned about you guys as a band from talking to you two is that you're all just big appreciators of each other's talents. You're all big fans of each other. That really comes across. So I really enjoyed listening to your EP. I'm super excited to see what you're doing next. And thanks so much for taking the time to chat with me.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Rhythm Changes podcast. If you haven't followed the show yet, make sure you do, and tell your friends who might enjoy listening too. Link them to our website, rhythmchanges.ca, Facebook at Chernoff Music, or Instagram and Twitter at Rhythm Changes BC. The Rhythm Changes podcast is a Chernoff Music production. See show notes for full production credits. Copyright 2022 Chernoff Music.